Especially over the last years, I got a much better photographer. I improved even more than I have expected, to be honest. And so I analyzed my photos because I wanted to find out what I have done actually to improve that much. And I bundled this together for you to 8 photography tips. And I really wished anyone had told me these tips already 30 years ago. They were such a big game changer for me. Hi my friends, very nice to see you. We will jump in right now. Just one thing quickly, I have good news. This week I have a giveaway for you. It is really useful for each photographer, and the best thing is I don't want to give it just to one of you, I want to give it to every one of you. So get sure to watch this video to the end. Well, my biggest game changers in photography. Let's dive in. You know, for me it is important to get crisp, clear images and as less ISO noise as possible. I did a lot of analog photography in my youth age, and when I took my first digital shots, I realized that the dynamic range on digital cameras was quite bad compared with that what I was used to. And meanwhile, technology got better too, but the dynamic range is still not comparable with analog photography. Also not on my 5,000 euros camera. So how can we get better image quality? I found ways to compensate for the missing dynamic range, but I made mistakes and I ruined a lot of photos. So the first thing I did is I had a look at the histogram. Just quick, the histogram simply shows us how an image is exposed. At the right we see the lights, and at the left we see the shadows. It shows us the full spectrum of the dynamic range, obviously. And so my first attempt was to use as much of that space inside the histogram to use the ampere dynamic range of my sensor, obviously. So ultimately I exposed to the right, and I corrected this afterwards in Photoshop by pulling the exposure down again. And in this way I rescued much more details in the shadows too, which was good. But I ruined so many photos by doing that. And the problem was, and you know, especially in outdoor photography, we are often confronted with changing light situations. So when it got a tiny bit brighter, it burned out my highlights and the photos just got rubbish. And I tried to compensate for that by using aperture priority on my camera instead of manual mode. And this worked in some cases, but not always. This has to do with the way of how the light metering works on a camera. I will not go into detail here, just let's talk about the solution. And the solution was to bracket the exposures. And this means I took different exposures for one composition. But I did this totally wrong. I always took just 3 exposures. One normal exposed, one underexposed and one overexposed with a distance of 2 stops between. And I mean I got 2 additional stops on each side of the histogram too, so theoretically I increased my dynamic range by 4 stops, what is really much. But it is anyway a totally bad idea, because this forced me to make an HDR or to blend the image in Photoshop all the time. But this doesn't work for all photos. So whenever you have movements in your photos, moving clouds, moving grasses, foliage or water or whatever, the different exposures will not look equally. And in so many cases the blending was simply not possible, or it was possible but you saw the blending mistakes in my image. But I got rid of this issue by a simple trick. Today, whenever I see that the highlights could burn out by changing light situation, I try to expose as far to the right as possible, but then I bracket with 5 exposures. 1 exposed to the right as much as possible, 2 underexposed and 2 overexposed with a distance of 0.7 stops between. 5 exposures in total. And now the thing is, in most of the cases I don't need to make an HDR or to blend the image in Photoshop. I just pick out that image that is exposed most to the right and where the highlights are not burned out. And for the case that the highlights are burned out, I just have to pick the slightly lower exposed version. A simple trick, but with a massive impact. And today I got perfect exposed images all the time with the best possible image quality. Well, another thing is the editing. And I get so many questions about editing in last time. How did you edit this photo? How did you get this painterly style on your image? And there will definitely come an own video about that. But let me show you the biggest mistake I made and how I got my editing to the next level actually. You know, it is a good idea to shoot in RAW format. But RAW images are flat, contrasts and saturation are missing and the tonality is wrong. So I engaged with the way how a camera processes image when you shoot JPEG, and I just tried to make it better than my camera. So whenever I imported a photo to Lightroom, and let me show you this quickly, I corrected the exposure, I brought the highlights down, I brought the shadows up, and I pulled the histogram apart by increasing the whites and decreasing the blacks to get more of these missing contrasts back. And I mean, you can do that, of course, you know, in art there is no right or wrong, but the goal of editing a fine art photograph is not to process like a camera. The goal is much more to support the mood of an image, to support the composition, and importantly, to support the message you want your image to say. And this is totally different for each photograph. This is also the reason why I don't use overall presets, by the way. They would help me, of course, to be faster on my editing through, but to nail the editing, I prefer to engage deeply with each single photograph, and this allows me really to get the best possible editing for every single photograph. So the way I edit today is totally depending on the image, and for this image here, this would probably mean that I even increase the blacks a tiny bit to support this foggy mood. I increase the midtones here with the tonal curve. Maybe I even don't want to have blacks in my image. It is totally up to me. The white balance helps me to change the mood, same with the tint. And maybe we give it a little bit of clarity and texture here in the foreground tree, but just here. This was just a quick and rough edit, of course, but whatever I do, I just support the mood and the composition. And this can lead to really powerful images. So whenever you edit an image, think about what your image is saying. Which mood do you want to convey, and then edit in a way to support exactly that, by trying out which effect the different sliders have on your image. Pulling the histogram apart is not always the best idea. One thing that improved my photography massively is depth. The problem is, the strongest method to perceive depth in reality is by our stereotype seeing. And this works because we live in a three-dimensional world. But as soon as we take a photograph, it will get reduced to just 2 dimensions only. So our stereotype seeing doesn't help us anymore to perceive a sense of depth when we look at the photo. And this is the reason why my old photos looked flat and boring. But today I get a huge amount of depth into my photographs. I often get comments like, your photos look like I could walk into them. And one simple trick I did is I started to include closer foreground elements into my frames. This helped massively. My photos got more depth and they started to look much more pleasing. So a good tip is use close foregrounds. But I made also here a big mistake. I always try to shoot close foregrounds. I ditched a lot of photo spots when I didn't find a pleasing foreground. And oh man, I missed so many good photographs by that. Today I use foregrounds only when it is possible and when it adds something to the composition. And today I get even depth into my photograph when I don't use a close foreground. This image here, for instance, is a well-sold print on my webshop and it doesn't have a foreground. But it is anyway quite powerful with the rising sun in the distance and the illuminated mist. I got depth in this image by placing equal elements on different layers. This tree here at the left, for instance, is quite big. Those back there are already much smaller. The mist behind them even accentuates them and it brings us to understand there is a lot of space behind them to the distance mountain. Same with the pattern in the snow. The closer part here shows us bigger textures and back there the pattern gets much smaller and also that part got illuminated, which emphasizes the sense of depth in this image. And we get also a nice 3D effect in this photo by the way how the light hits the shore here at the left hand side. I will not go into detail here, I made already a comprehensive video about depth. I think I show even 7 methods, 7 different ways how to get depth into your photos, where I go also much more in detail. I will link it up here for you. Let's stick to foregrounds. There's one thing, it was a massive improvement for my compositions. And the mistake I made was not a beginner's mistake, by the way. I see this even on pro photographers. I didn't see this for my first 25 years of photography. I found this out some years ago, and it is the way how we build up compositions. So when let's say we see a nice mountain in the distance, or a waterfall or whatever, we want to get this subject into our frame, obviously. And so what we do is, also as experienced photographers, we try to go a little bit more left, a little bit more right, up and down to find the best kind of window for placing our mountain or waterfall, and that's basically good. But what's happening then is we are cutting our foreground elements, and in most cases this doesn't look pleasing. You know, the foreground is the gate, obviously, to lead a viewer into the frame, because we are used to reading landscapes images from bottom to the top. So when there are a lot of horizontals at the bottom, this effect gets totally blocked. And there's also no plasticity in the image or in the foreground then. So the solution is, and it took me 25 years to understand that, the solution is to go a tiny bit closer to the foreground element and to tilt also my camera a little bit more down, so that I photograph them a little bit more from above. Yeah, it is like you would turn your vertical window more to something like that. And it doesn't have all too much effect on the midground and distance layer, but it stretches the foreground elements a bit more apart, and it is so much easier to get a more powerful foreground. So this image here is not bad, but the bottom corner is a bit messy. But in this image here, at the same location, the foreground builds this connection, this kind of gate between reality and the image. And so the viewer drifts much easier into the frame. We get also this natural frame here at the right bottom corner because of photographing from above. Or here another good example. The idea was to use this line here at the left hand side and that one at the right hand side to lead into the frame as a kind of a triangle shape here. But the bottom border doesn't work. It is too messy here. And also the rocks back there don't merge nicely with the layer behind. So when I returned to that place, I went closer to the foreground elements here at the left hand side and I tilted my camera down, what led to a much more powerful image. So that's really a good tip here for getting stronger compositions. Always consider to tilt your window or your camera actually a little bit more down and to photograph a tiny bit more from above. My friends, I'm so excited about the giveaway which I have for you, and really everyone will get one. But before I will come to the next top tip, my friends, if you like this video, please consider to give me a thumb up. It helps me, it helps the algorithm, and it helps also other photographers out there to find this video better on YouTube. Thank you therefore. I struggled with photographing water. Whatever I tried, it didn't work. And my aim was to photograph water as natural as possible. And yeah, it's quite difficult because water itself is transparent. And there's always a movement in water, on floating water, but also on water surfaces. So the way how we perceive water in reality is as a movement. And so there is no way to photograph movement. At least not in a way that it looks totally equally to our perception in reality. And this is the reason why water will always be an abstract element in our photographs. And this is something we have to accept. And so what I always did is the same what I always again see in my workshops. Whenever I see water, I grab my ND filters and I grab my circular polarizers. I never thought about why, I just did it because everyone did it. And this ended up that I didn't get any textures on my water. It looked flat and boring. And then there happened one thing. I forgot to screw my filters on. And I took this shot. It's not a good composition, but this was the first image where I liked the way how I photographed water by accident. I also took a shot with filters and I got this one. Yeah, I mean the same bad composition, but this time even with rubbish water. Today I think deeply into a scene, into a composition, and I ask myself how I want to have my water. It could be that I want to get a contrast between tranquility and dynamic, like in this image here for instance, with that enchanting woodland back there and the powerful water floating down. And today I like to use texture of water to emphasize the drama or to lead the viewer to a particular area in my composition, because we have lines and patterns in the water. But it could also be that I want to simplify a scene by flattening the water. I simply found out that the texture on water can be a quite expressive character in a composition. I like this image here for instance. The water was calm, there was just a tiny bit of movement, and then there came a fish up to eat some midges or so, which drew this nice circle here into her face. Awesome, isn't it? So, very important, whenever you want to photograph water, think about what are the filters doing with your composition? Which impact does the water have in the scene when it is flat, without textures? And which impact does it have when you show textures instead? And this is how I decide on using an ND filter or not. And same with the polarizer, by the way. Ask yourself if you need a polarizer or not. And if you even want to master it, we could even also think about how far we want to screw on our polarizer. And I made already a video about that. I will link it up here for you. There's one thing I didn't like about analog photography back then. Whenever I exposed, it cost money. And that's different with digital photography, because today there's one thing I don't like about digital photography. Whenever I expose, it doesn't cost money. And the problem is, I can expose as often I want, but it doesn't have any negative consequences. But the negative consequences were good actually. They bring me to think even deeper into a composition, and a quite funny thing is I found a solution to solve this problem with printing. I know this sounds crazy, but really, trust me here. So it doesn't cost money when I expose through, but it costs money when I print. And so whenever I work on a composition out in the field, I give 110% because my goal is to print it afterwards. And I don't print rubbish photos, I only print those I really like. And this had a big impact on my improvement. Already when I printed over a lab. And when I bought my own printer, this effect got even much stronger. And today I fine-tune so much on my prints. I print different versions, I compare them to get really the perfect print. But I think already out on location how my image will look printed on different sort of papers, and this improved my compositional skills as well, because I have to engage deeper with the composition. And I got also much better on tonality and luminosity, because on a screen I have a higher dynamic range than on a finer paper. I have to think carefully about the properties of the paper, how dark I can go in the shadows so that I don't lose details, or how bright I can go in the highlights to get more textures of the paper itself appearing in the print maybe. I started to think differently about tonality, and all in all I can say printing made me a better photographer. So I can highly recommend to print at least your best photos of the year. There is nothing wrong with printing over a lab. Labs are even a fantastic possibility to get into touch with printing. Important is that you work on your improvement. And if you shouldn't know how to improve your printing, I will link your video up there. Well, in my analog times I read a lot of books about photography. I knew how light worked in a studio, but for landscape photography there are to be considered a little bit more factors. And I thought it was all about the direction, the softness and the temperature of the light source as it is in a studio. So I did that, what was recommended in a lot of photography books, and ultimately I went out for photography only in golden hour at sunrise and sunset. I mean, you can get fantastic light on those daytimes, but I missed so many good photographs which I had got at other daytimes. And you can get really amazing light even around noon. I will not go into detail here in this video, I made already a video about light actually. Just one important thing. Go out for photography, whatever the light is. Light is not generally good or bad. There's just a different sort of light. And it is all about that the light fits to your composition and to the story you want to convey with your image. I can recommend to engage with the behavior of light. So for instance, in this image here, I got the mist up here, illuminated from the side. And as you can see, it catches the orange light of the setting sun in such an enchanting way. Or in this image here, there was also mist straight at sunrise, but it got backlit. So it started to glow in these warm tones. But you can also use backlight to bring the foliage of woodland to glow, as it was in this image here. We had flat light in the gorge, but quite vibrant light in the woodland up there. Yeah, light can do quite crazy things, and there is even much more light can do. And it is so important to understand that all, so that you can use light to get really strong images. I will link you a video about light up here where I go much more in detail. So before I come to the tip which had the biggest impact on my photography improvement, let me tell you about one thing that gets so often overseen. I had already photographers saying that they're photographing already for decades, but they have forgotten about that. It is the way how we find compositions out in the field. It is even the way how to get creative. And the problem is, whenever you ask anyone if he thinks to be creative, I promise you, try it out by yourself. 19 of 20 will answer, yes, they are creative. And I'm absolutely convinced photographers are generally creative. All artists are creative, more than non-artists obviously. But the question is it enough to be just a tiny bit more creative than a non-artist? I made a poll some time ago. I simply wanted to know where you struggle most so that I can help you out with the best way in my videos. And the absolute majority answered the thing you struggle most is finding compositions out in the field. And the thing is, the ability to find compositions out in the field is just all about creativity. I think over the last years I did never totally hard with finding compositions. I think that I am creative, but I have learned that there's anyway a lot of space to improve my creativity, and that's possible. Creativity is often handled as just a talent or a gift you get with your birth, and either you have it or you have it not. But actually, it is just a property which is trainable. You know, I had a knee injury last year. I was not able to walk for months. This was quite bad because I wasn't able to hike to outstanding places, but it boosted my creative skills massively. Today I do so much easier with seeing compositions out in the field, although I was already good in that before. And the reason therefore is simply, as I wasn't able to move around all too much, I started to engage deeper with the environment around me. I took photographs straight from the parking places or also from my garden, places where I had never thought about taking photographs. And this limitation brought my photography up to the next level. And the trick is really to pay attention to the environment, to engage with the elements around you deeply into detail. Really, I can't stress you enough how important this is. Today, I do so easy with finding compositions. I mean, sometimes I also struggle today, of course. But when I take my time, just focus on the things that attract me, I can't avoid seeing compositions actually. It is really just all about taking time and engaging. But I can highly recommend to engage with methods to get a more creative person. Also, if you think you are already creative, there is always a next level in creativity. I made already a video about creativity. I will link it here for you, and there will definitely come more about that here on my channel. The thing that had the biggest impact on my photography improvement is all about composition. Well, the short version is I stopped using the common rules of photography some years ago. Yeah, I mean, there's a reason for this shirt here, and it's wrong, by the way. I'm not a rule breaker, I'm more a rules ignorer. So just quickly what happened. You know, I come from a family of artists. My grandfather, for instance, was a painter and a professor in art. And since I was a little boy, yeah, really, since I can think actually, I engaged with the compositions of my grandfather. How to bring a viewer into the frame, how to hold him inside as long as possible, how to turn the viewer's experience into a quite enjoyable one, so that he even wants to come back to enjoy the image again. And the thing is, later, when I started with photography, when I was 12, I didn't see that composition in photography is exactly the same as for painting. It took me years before I understood that. So I engaged with the same well-known common rules of photography, the rule of thirds, the golden spiral, the rule of space, and all these things. But using these rules didn't lead to outstanding photos for me. My photographs started to get outstanding when I stopped using rules. I did something different instead, and we'll talk about that in a minute. First of all, I tried to find out the sense behind each single photography rule, because I experienced that they were just limiting me in my possibilities. And I saw more and more that they were just a kind of carrying wheels for beginners, so that beginners don't have to engage with the rule architecture of composition like it is in art. I think basically it is good to use rules in the beginning because they help you to get better photos quickly without thinking all too much. But exactly that is the problem in my experience. They stop you to think. Now let me give you a quick example. The rule of thirds. You know, in an art history architecture, balance is a quite important thing. It is all about balancing the left with the right side of an image. A symmetrical image is well balanced obviously, but symmetrical images tend to get boring when you don't consider things to overcome that. So when we place an element by using the rule of thirds, it leads automatically to an asymmetrical composition, which conveys much more dynamic through, but what no one tells you is that you have to balance the element which you have placed to the third. Otherwise, the image would get out of balance. Balance is not a common rule of photography, it is just one of these well-known methods which are used in art for getting control over the emotions of the viewer. The more an image is balanced, the more comfortable the viewer's experience gets. But the more we bring it out of balance, the more uncomfortable it gets. And this is a technique which is also used in horror movies, by the way. Just think about people looking out of the frame or a crooked horizon or something like that. And what I do is I use all these techniques from painting to get control over the emotions of the viewers. And the only problem I have here now is this topic is too comprehensive for this video. This video is already too long. So what I have done now for you is I made an ebook about composition where I consider all these techniques of composition I use all the time. And I will definitely sell it on my web shop. But I said I have a giveaway for you. So for a short time only, I will offer you this ebook for free to every one of you. So how can you get to my ebook for free, to my composition ebook? There is a link down in my description to my ebook. The ebook itself will be sent to you with an email, so please get sure that you fill in your email address on the download page, and don't forget to tick on free updates, news and offers. The thing is, I really try to give as many tips in my videos as possible, but anyway, I often stumble over some more tips, additional tips, which didn't fit into the video, which are not enough stuff for an own video, but which are quite useful. And I share these additional tips with my newsletter, where I also inform about my free places on workshops, or maybe some more free books or something like that. Whatever could be useful for you. However, the link for the ebook is down in the description, and just for a short time, it will be free for you. My friends, my biggest game changers in my photography, I hope this was useful for you. Leave me a comment below which changes in your photography led to a big improvement as well. I'm always happy about your comments, also if you just leave me a hello. And don't forget to tune in next week, there will come a fantastic video as well. Thank you so much for watching, see you next time, bye.